All right, welcome to your deep dive. Wow, looks like someone's been hitting the books about the modern food system, huh? Trying to get a grip on what works, what doesn't, and maybe how to eat a little bit more intentionally.
Yeah, you've got quite the stack of sources here, and I'm excited to dig in.
So the goal today is to, help you pull out the big ideas from all this reading that you've been doing and maybe walk away with a better framework for making those food choices, the more informed ones, the contemplative ones even.
Hmm, contemplative eating. I like that. Yeah, we'll uncover some surprising stuff, maybe even shift your perspective a little bit. You ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it. So to get us started, one of the things that jumped out from your sources was this analogy of a dining table
Hmm.
to represent, of all things, the modern food system. What's the thinking there?
Well, you got to picture this, right?
Mm.
It's the biggest dining table there's ever been. Like, we're talking feeding more people than any time in human history. I mean, that's a pretty big feat, wouldn't you say?
That's huge.
But there's a but. It's not without its wobbly legs, right? Maybe a few cracks here and there in the surface. It ain't perfect, that's for sure.
Okay, I can see where this is going. So how did we even get to this supersized table anyway? I mean, we started out as hunter-gatherers, moved on to agriculture, and now we have this crazy complex system of what production and distribution. What were some of those big turning points along the way?
Yeah. It's funny. Each step had its own kind of trade-offs. Like, take the shift to agriculture, right? Suddenly we could produce more food, settle down in one place. But that also meant depending on a smaller number of crops, which, let me tell you, made us way more vulnerable to, oh, I don't know, like weather changes and stuff. Plus, competition for resources starts heating up.
Right, right. Solve
Right.
one problem, create a couple more. Classic. And it feels like those trade-offs are, I don't know, still playing out even today. We can produce a ton of food, no question, but your sources really get into the hidden costs, right? Like the nutritional
Right.
value, the environmental impact, even animal welfare.
Exactly. We've gotten so good at churning out calories, but maybe not as good at producing food that actually nourishes us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the effects on the planet and, like you
Yep.
said, how we treat animals, that's a big piece of the puzzle, too.
So where does this whole contemplative eating thing come in then? I mean, is it about trying to fix all those cracks in the table, or is it something else entirely?
Contemplative eating, it's not about finding some like perfect diet. It's more like recognizing that we're all part of this big complicated food system and making choices that make sense for us.
Hmm.
Our values, our priorities. It's about seeing the whole picture, not just what's on your plate in front of you.
I like that. So less about like strict rules, more about being informed and making choices, conscious ones, right?
Absolutely.
And, your sources, they actually lay out these five main pillars of contemplative eating, which are, let me see if I can remember all of them: physical health, mental well-being, sustainability, the ethics of it all, and then that social aspect of food. Sounds like we've got a lot to cover.
We do. But those pillars, they're like lenses, right?
Yeah.
They help us look at our food choices in different ways. So it's not just how does this affect my body, but also like what are the ripple effects, out there in the world.
I love that, the ripple effects.
Oh,
And speaking of how our bodies work, let's talk about that amazing brain of ours, huh? And how it like nudges us towards certain foods because it's not always a logical process, is it?
oh, no, not always. We like to think we're in charge, making these rational decisions about food, but really there's this whole orchestra of hormones and brain chemicals happening behind the scenes, right? They play a huge role in what we crave, how much we end up eating.
So sometimes like those cravings, they're actually biological. It's not just like a willpower thing, right? Can you give us an example of how those hormones kind of pull the strings, so to speak?
Oh, absolutely. Think about hangry, right?
Mm.
Everyone's been there. You haven't eaten in a while, your blood sugar takes a dip, and suddenly you're not the nicest person to be around.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not just you being dramatic, all right? It's your body saying, hey, I need fuel, like now. It's sending you a signal, loud and clear.
Yeah, those hanger pangs are real. So what's going on in the brain when that happens?
Well, when your stomach's empty, this hormone, ghrelin, starts to rise.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically your body's built-in hunger alarm, right? And it's like ringing right to your brain, feed me. And the longer you go without eating, the louder that alarm gets, believe me.
So it's not just willpower. Our biology is literally pushing us to eat. But what about those times when we eat even when we're not physically hungry? Like when we see I don't know, a delicious dessert or someone's like, "Oh, have another helping."
Well, that's where things get really, really fascinating. We've got another hormone to introduce here, leptin. Leptin's kind of like the brakes on hunger, okay? So as we eat and our, fat stores build up, leptin sends this signal to the brain, okay, slow down on the appetite, let's burn some energy.
Hmm.
It's like this perfect feedback loop, but here's the catch. In our modern world, that loop, it gets a little messed up sometimes.
So what's throwing off this delicate balance then? I have a feeling it has something to do with our modern food environment,
Yeah,
right?
oh, you nailed it. Our world today, it's like designed to mess with those natural signals for hunger and fullness. We're just bombarded with these super tasty, high-calorie foods that are like engineered to hit those pleasure centers in our brains.
Yeah, I mean, food companies, they put a lot of science, a lot of research into making their products like irresistible. But how does that tie back to our hormones getting all out of whack?
Well, think about it, right? When we're constantly around these hyperpalatable foods, our brains, they start connecting them with pleasure, with feeling good. And each time we give in, we get this hit of dopamine, that feel-good brain chemical. But over time, it's like our brains kind of get desensitized to it. We need more and more to get that same level of satisfaction.
Oh, so it's almost like building up a tolerance, like what happens with drugs.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Mm.
And just like with drugs, it can turn into this cycle of craving and then eating way too much. We eat even when our bodies aren't actually hungry.
Mhm.
We're driven by those dopamine cravings. Plus, you got to factor in like the sheer abundance of food we have these days, right? I mean, it's everywhere. We're not limited by seasons anymore or having to like hunt or gather food. It's 24/7, a click away, a drive-through away.
And then you add social media on top of all that. It's a constant stream of like mouth-watering pictures and videos. Makes it even harder to resist.
Oh, for sure. Our brains, they're wired to zero in on food cues. And social media, it's like it takes those cues and puts them on steroids. Those perfectly plated dishes, those recipe videos that make everything look so good, they trigger that dopamine rush, and suddenly you're reaching for a snack even if you just ate.
It's funny you mentioned dopamine. Isn't that the same brain chemical that's linked to addiction?
That's the one. Now, I'm not saying food is addictive in the same way that, drugs or alcohol are. But the way our brains react to those super tasty foods,
Yeah.
there are definitely some parallels there.
That's kind of freaky when you think about it. But it does explain why it can be so hard to say no to certain foods, even when you know they're not the best choice.
It's all about awareness, right?
Mhm.
Knowing that these things, our biology, the world around us, even our psychology, they're all intertwined when it comes to how we eat. It's not just about willpower or, labeling foods as good or bad.
Okay, so we've talked about the food system, the biology of how we choose what we eat. But let's get down to brass tacks. What about our individual health? What does the latest science say about making choices that really support our well-being?
Now, this is where things get really interesting. One of the sources you sent, it really dug into this whole saturated fat thing.
Yeah.
Is it really the villain we've been told it is? Or is there more to the story?
I was surprised to learn that the science on saturated fat, it's not as black and white as we've been led to believe, right? It's not just a good versus bad situation.
Exactly. For years, decades even, saturated fat's been, public enemy number one when it comes to heart health.
Yeah.
But more recent research is starting to question that. Some studies even suggest that swapping out saturated fat for, I don't know, refined carbs and those nasty trans fats, that might actually be worse for you.
So it's not just about avoiding saturated fat entirely. It's more about making sure you're replacing it with healthier options. What do you think about all this back and forth? There's still a lot of mixed messages out there.
There is. That's why it's so important to, look at all the evidence, the big picture, not just get caught up in those overly simplistic ideas. When it comes to fat, it's about quality,
Mm-hmm.
you know? Think olive oil, avocados, nuts, seeds, those good fats,
Mm-hmm.
and then try to steer clear of the bad guys like trans fats and those heavily processed vegetable oils.
Makes sense. Quality over quantity, right? The sources you sent, they also talked a lot about omega-3s. What's so special about them?
So omega-3s, those are essential fatty acids, meaning our bodies can't make them. We got to get them from food.
Mhm.
And they do a ton for us. Brain health, heart health, fighting inflammation.
Yeah.
But a lot of us, we're just not getting enough these days.
Yeah, I know fatty fish like salmon, that's a great source. But what if you're, I don't know, not a fish person? Or you're eating mostly plants? What are your options then?
Don't worry, there are plenty. Flax seeds, chia seeds, walnuts, those are all great plant-based sources. And if you're thinking about supplements, there are some made from algae that are a good alternative to fish oil.
Good to know. Good to know. What about protein supplements? Are those necessary for everyone?
Honestly, most people, they can get all the protein they need from a balanced diet. Beans, lentils, tofu, nuts, seeds, whole grains, that kind of stuff. But there are some folks who might need a little extra. Athletes, for example, older adults, anyone recovering from an injury, it can help them meet those higher protein needs. But if you're going to go the supplement route, make sure you're picking a good quality product and using it in moderation.
So helpful for some, but not a magic bullet for everyone. Speaking of overall well-being, one of the things that really blew my mind in these sources was the connection between what we eat and our mental health.
Ah, yes. This is where we get into this fascinating kind of mind-blowing concept called the gut-brain axis. It's essentially this communication highway between your gut and your brain, two-way street. And what we eat, it turns out it can have a huge impact on the health of our gut microbiome, which then in turn can affect our mood, our focus, even how we handle stress.
Okay, hold on. Break that down for me. What exactly is the gut microbiome, and why is it so important for our mental state?
So picture this, right? Your gut microbiome, it's like this massive ecosystem of trillions of bacteria living in your digestive tract. These little guys, they're busy breaking down food, making vitamins, helping out our immune system. But now we're realizing they have a huge role in how our brains function too.
Wait, so you're telling me the health of our gut can actually affect our mood, how clearly we think? How does that even work?
It's complicated, but basically, research is showing that when the gut microbiome is out of balance, it can lead to inflammation. And not just in the gut itself, but throughout the body, including the brain. And studies have linked that inflammation to higher rates of anxiety, depression, things like that.
Wow. So it's not just about therapy or managing stress.
Yeah.
What we put in our bodies matters too.
100%. And you know what's one of the biggest things that affects the health of our gut microbiome?
What's that?
Our diet.
Okay, so what kind of diet keeps our gut happy, our minds sharp? What should we be eating?
Fiber. Lots and lots of fiber. Think fruits, veggies, whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, that good stuff. These foods, they act as prebiotics. Basically, they're food for the good bacteria in our gut,
Yeah.
helping them thrive and multiply. On the flip side, a diet that's full of, processed foods, sugar, artificial sweeteners, that can really throw the microbiome out of whack.
So it's not just about what we eat, but also what we avoid. Are there any specific foods that we should be extra careful with when it comes to our mental well-being?
Yeah, those refined carbohydrates, especially the sugary drinks and processed snacks, they can cause those blood sugar spikes and crashes.
Yeah.
Mood swings, irritability, hard to concentrate. That whole sugar roller coaster feeling,
Hmm.
not fun.
Oh, I've been there. Definitely not fun. What about coffee and tea? Good or bad for our mental states? I know a lot of people, they rely on those for a mental boost.
You know, in moderation, they can actually be beneficial. Coffee and tea can help with alertness, focus, even improve mood a bit, but got to be careful with how much caffeine you're getting and how it affects your sleep.
Right. It's about finding that balance, getting the benefits without messing with your sleep or getting dependent on it.
Mhm.
Okay, so we've talked about the impact our food choices have on us individually, but the sources you sent, they also brought up the bigger picture, right? The impact food production has on the environment.
That's right. Remember the dining table analogy? One of its wobbly legs, it's definitely the environmental footprint of what we choose to eat. Everything from how it's grown or raised, how it gets to us, even the packaging. It all leaves a mark on the planet.
The stuff I sent you really dives into that footprint, especially when it comes to like greenhouse gas emissions, land use, water use. It's pretty eye-opening.
It's a complex issue for sure.
Yeah.
But one thing that really jumps out is the impact of meat consumption, particularly beef. Livestock production, it's a huge contributor to greenhouse gases, deforestation, and polluting our water.
So what are the alternatives? I know the sources talked about like plant-based protein, aquaculture, even lab-grown meat. Is going plant-based the only way to eat sustainably?
It doesn't have to be all or nothing. Even small changes like cutting back on meat can make a difference. It's about shifting the balance on your plate, having more plant-based foods.
So like swapping a beef burger for a veggie burger a couple times a week, that could actually help.
Absolutely, every little bit counts. And when you do eat meat, think about where it comes from. Look for meat from farms that care about sustainability and treating animals well. Another option to consider is aquaculture. fish farming. When it's done right, it could be a more sustainable way to get seafood compared to traditional fishing.
And then there's that almost sci-fi sounding lab-grown meat. Is that really a viable option for the future?
Lab-grown meat or cultivated meat, it's still early days, but it has the potential to really change how we produce protein. Basically, it's about growing meat directly from animal cells in a lab.
Mm.
So, no need for traditional animal agriculture.
So we could still enjoy meat, the taste, the texture, but without all the ethical baggage and the environmental impact that comes with raising livestock.
Exactly. And it's not just meat. Cellular agriculture, that's the bigger field. It can be used to make all sorts of animal products.
Yeah.
Dairy, eggs, even leather without harming animals.
It sounds almost too good to be true. But putting aside all these new technologies, what about the food we already have? I know the sources talked about food waste being a huge problem. What can we do to make sure we're not contributing to that?
Oh, reducing food waste, that's one of the most impactful things we can do. It's crazy, but it's estimated that a third of all the food produced globally, it gets wasted. And all those resources that went into making that food, the land, the water, the energy, the labor, it's all wasted too when that
Mm.
food ends up in a landfill.
That's mind-boggling. So what can we do in our everyday lives to waste less food?
Planning. Take a little time each week to, plan out your meals, make a grocery list based on what you're actually going to cook. That way you're not buying more than you need.
That's a good tip. I know I'm guilty of those impulse buys at the grocery store, things that just end up going bad in the fridge.
We've all been there. Another thing that helps is getting creative with leftovers. Don't think of them as like sad second day meals. Think of them as a chance to turn those ingredients into something new and exciting.
Mm.
And finally, storing food properly is key. Learn how to store different types of produce so they stay fresh longer.
Planning, repurposing leftovers, and proper storage. Sounds pretty simple.
It is. Small changes, big impact. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about something that can be a bit, well, uncomfortable. The ethics of eating.
This is where we really start to think about our values, our beliefs about our relationship with food and the animals that provide it for us.
Your sources, they really delved into this concept of speciesism.
Hmm.
It's the idea that humans are somehow superior to other animals and that it's okay to use them for our own purposes, food being one of them.
And the sources you sent didn't shy away from describing factory farming, which can be pretty disturbing.
Factory farming, it's a complex issue. Lots of different viewpoints to consider. It's all about efficiency and profit, but often that comes at the cost of animal welfare, right? The sources you sent, they highlighted those ethical concerns around, how animals are confined, the selective breeding, the way they're treated in those intensive systems.
It definitely makes you think about our responsibility to treat animals humanely, even if they are eventually going to end up on our plates.
Exactly. And this leads to the moral argument for veganism.
Right. The sources presented a pretty strong case for veganism, and that it's wrong to exploit animals for food or for any other purpose. It's a perspective that seems to be gaining traction these days.
Veganism is a personal choice, and it's not always easy. There are practical things to think about, cultural norms, habits that are hard to break. But for people who are concerned about animal welfare, it's definitely a framework worth thinking about.
So what about those of us who aren't ready to go full vegan? Is there a way to eat ethically without giving up all animal products?
Of course. One approach is to, significantly cut back on how much you consume, especially stuff from factory farms. Choose meat and dairy from places that treat animals well. Or maybe try incorporating more plant-based meals into your week.
It's about being aware of where our food comes from, the impact it has.
You got it. Even those small shifts, they add up. We've been talking about some pretty serious stuff, but let's not forget the joy of food, the social connection it brings.
That's so important. Food isn't just fuel. It's about culture, tradition, enjoying a meal with people you care about.
You said it. And your sources, they actually traced how meal patterns have evolved over time.
Hmm.
How food has always been this way to bring people together. It's a universal thing. It transcends time and cultures.
It's amazing to think how meal patterns have changed over the centuries, from like those big feasts our ancestors had to the fast-paced grab-and-go meals we see today. But one thing that seems to have stuck around is that social element, right? That connection we get from sharing food.
Absolutely. Food, it's always been a way to bring people together, to celebrate, to comfort, to connect. Holidays, birthdays, religious ceremony, even just a simple family dinner. Food is often at the center of it all.
And there's more and more research showing that eating with others is good for us. And I'm not just talking about feeling good, there are actual health benefits too.
Right. Studies are showing that we tend to make healthier choices when we're eating with other people, and we're more likely to eat mindfully too, savoring each bite, paying attention to when we're full.
That makes sense. It's easy to overeat when you're, I don't know, distracted by your phone or the TV.
Exactly. And beyond the physical benefits, there's the social and emotional stuff too. Eating together can strengthen family bonds, improve communication, even reduce stress, give us a sense of belonging, of connection.
It's like a ritual. It reminds us that we're part of something bigger. But with our busy lives these days, it can be tough to find the time for shared meals.
It's a challenge, for sure. We're always rushing, eating on the go, or alone in front of screens.
Hmm.
But even small changes help. Try to prioritize family meals a few times a week, even if it's just for half an hour. Make it a thing. Put away the phones, turn off the TV, just be present with each other.
And what about people who live alone or don't have family nearby? Are they missing out?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
There are other ways to connect with people through food. Sharing a meal with friends, going to potlucks, even joining a community garden, things like that. It's about finding ways to make food social in a way that feels good and meaningful for you.
It's all about finding what works, right? And
Yeah.
and that brings us back to this idea of the adaptivore that your sources talked about. The adaptivore, that's a new one. What is that?
So the adaptivore, it's this idea that humans, we've evolved to do well on all sorts of different foods. We're not meant to eat the same thing like day after day.
That makes sense if you think about it, right? Like our ancestors, they had to be adaptable, eating whatever they could find, whatever was in season.
Exactly. And that flexibility, it's what allowed us to survive, even thrive in all these different environments throughout history. So the adaptivore thing, it's not about, strict rules, fad diets. It's about embracing variety, trying new foods, being open to new ways of thinking about food.
So instead of getting hung up on restrictions, it's more about listening to our bodies, understanding what we need, making choices that support our health and how we feel.
Exactly. It's about realizing that what we choose to eat, it's affected by so many things. Our culture, what we like, even our concerns about the environment. There's no one right way. What works for one person might not work for another.
That's a good point. And speaking of exciting new possibilities, let's go back to cellular agriculture for a minute. We talked about lab-grown meat earlier, but this is way bigger than that, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Cellular agriculture, it's about making food directly from cells
Mhm.
without needing, traditional farms or raising animals the way we do now. It's like taking the core of how we produce food and moving it to this more controlled setting where it could be, potentially a lot more sustainable.
Okay, that is seriously mind-blowing. So beyond meat, what else can we make with this technology?
Think about it. Dairy products without needing cows, eggs without chickens,
Yeah.
even leather without harming any animals. That's the potential of this stuff. It could help solve some of the biggest ethical dilemmas and environmental problems we have with our food system right now.
And the sources you sent, they talked about this wild idea of like food from thin air. Wait, are you saying it's actually possible to make food from the air we breathe? That sounds like science fiction.
It might sound crazy, but there are companies already doing it. Solar Foods, they're up in Finland,
Oh.
and they're developing these processes that use microbes to basically turn carbon dioxide and water from the air into ingredients that are packed with protein.
So instead of needing land, water, all those resources that are, limited, we could make food from the air. That's revolutionary.
It is. And it could be a game changer when it comes to making sure everyone has enough to eat, especially with the global population growing and climate change making things even harder.
It's an exciting time to be thinking about food, that's for sure. It makes you wonder what other innovations are just around the corner.
I know, right? There's so much happening.
Yeah.
Plant-based stuff, personalized nutrition,
Mm.
even foods that are like designed to address specific health problems. It's amazing.
It feels like we've just scratched the surface today. I mean, we covered so much: the biology of how we choose food, the environmental impact, the ethics, even the joy of sharing meals with others. It's a lot to take in.
It is. It is. But hopefully, you're leaving with a better understanding of all these things that affect what we eat, how those choices impact us, our communities, the planet. It's all connected.
Contemplative eating, it's a journey, right? It's about asking questions, being curious, and making choices that feel right for you.
And as you continue on that journey, think about this. In a world where we have so much food, so much abundance, what does it mean to eat? Not just well, but wisely. That's something to chew on.
What a great question to end on. Thanks for joining me for this incredible deep dive. It's been a pleasure.